You wake up in the morning, the alarm blaring, urging you to start the day. You stretch, reach for your phone and tell yourself just 5 more minutes. Then, a voice within, one that feels entirely like you, decides to hit snooze. That very voice, that decision to hit snooze, wasn't entirely yours at all. The most intimate parts of your mind, your desires, intentions, and carefully made plans weren't as fully under your control as you believed. If we don't control our minds, then who does? Today's documentary discusses the profound question, who controls your mind? This is what scientists are now studying and exploring, and their findings are both amazing and unsettling. Let's start with a story. Meet Sarah, a 32-year-old professional who's set herself a goal to run 3 miles every morning before work. She's watched countless motivational videos, bought top-tier running shoes, and even downloaded an app to keep herself on track. But morning after morning, Sarah finds herself in bed, scrolling social media or hitting the snooze button rather than lacing up her sneakers. Every evening she promises herself she'll wake up and run. Yet each morning some invisible force seems to take hold, guiding her away from her goal. Why? It's not that Sarah doesn't want to run, she's genuinely excited about the benefits. But something else keeps her actions out of sync with her intentions. Sarah, like many of us, has come face to face with a puzzling disconnect between what she desires and what she ultimately does. And perhaps this feeling is familiar to you too. For centuries, we've clung to the belief that our thoughts, desires, and choices are our own. The concept of free will, that powerful sense that we are the authors of our own lives, is woven deeply into our identities. Free will comforts us. It lets us believe that our choices, big or small, shape our paths. It's an idea as old as philosophy itself, debated by thinkers from Plato and Aristotle to Kant and Nietzsche. In fact, free will underpins nearly every story we tell ourselves about who we are, whether it's as individuals, as communities, or as a species. But what if free will is an illusion? What if the comforting belief that we're driving our own lives is in reality just a mirage, a cleverly crafted illusion? Today, research in neuroscience, psychology, and even artificial intelligence presents compelling evidence suggesting that our decisions may not be as freely made as we once assumed. In fact, there's mounting evidence that unseen forces within our own brains may be subtly guiding us, nudging our thoughts and actions without us even realizing it. In this documentary, we're discussing the hidden forces behind our choices. We'll explore how biological and psychological mechanisms might be influencing our daily decisions. From the habits we form to the emotions we feel, the mind's complexity reveals more about us than we ever thought possible. Our journey will lead us to explore hidden biases, the ways our brains shape our experiences, and the powerful, sometimes deceptive forces that influence who we think we are. By the end, you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of the mind and a clearer picture of what it means to truly be in control, or perhaps out of it. To the early Greeks, the mind was something otherworldly, something beyond the grasp of reason, a piece of the divine. Plato imagined the soul as a charioteer steering the body, with reason, spirit and desire pulling in different directions. Aristotle, on the other hand, argued for a more grounded, naturalistic approach, proposing that the soul was not separate from the body but an essential part of it, breathing life into flesh and bone. In the East, ancient Chinese thinkers like Confucius and 𝐿aozhi approached the mind differently, emphasizing harmony and balance between internal states and the world around them. The mind wasn't a separate, isolated entity. It was interwoven with the natural order, a concept known as the Tao or the Way. Here, understanding oneself was more about aligning with external forces rather than delving into internal conflicts. The mind, in this view, was a mirror, reflecting the ebb and flow of nature. Yet for all these thinkers, the mind remained shrouded in mystery, a place of the gods and spirits. They didn't possess the tools we have today, MRI scanners, EEGs, or even a coherent theory of neurons. Instead, they used myth and metaphor to grapple with the question of who we are. The struggle to understand the mind had begun, but there was no roadmap, only intuition and imagination. Fast forward to the 17th century, where an intellectual revolution is underway. Here stands René Descartes, a philosopher whose ideas would echo through the ages. Descartes' famous dictum, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, painted the mind as something separate, distinct from the body. This was dualism, the belief that the mind and body were two different substances. According to Descartes, the mind was the seat of the soul, the ghost in the machine, if you will. But with the Enlightenment came the age of science and reason, and the mind was no longer untouchable. Thinkers like John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant began to question whether our thoughts, beliefs, and perceptions were as reliable as they seemed. Were we really conscious authors of our own decisions, or was our sense of control little more than an illusion? Locke proposed the idea of the mind as a tabula rasa, a blank slate shaped by experiences. Hume took it further, suggesting that our sense of self was just a bundle of perceptions constantly changing with no true essence beneath it. These ideas were revolutionary, laying the groundwork for psychology as a science. They began to chip away at the walls of dualism, suggesting that the mind might be subject to natural laws, just like the rest of the physical world. The Enlightenment had lit a fire, and scholars and scientists began to explore the mysteries of the mind with newfound rigor. The brain was no longer a mystical realm, it was becoming a biological puzzle to be solved. But it was only a glimmer of what was to come. The 19th century ushered in a wave of curiosity about the brain's structure. Phrenology, a field that seems almost laughable now, but which sparked serious interest at the time. Phrenologists believed they could determine personality traits by studying the bumps on a person's skull. It was primitive, of course, but it marked a crucial turning point. People began to link mental functions to specific parts of the brain. Real scientific breakthroughs, however, came later. The work of Santiago Ramón y Cajal, a Spanish neuroscientist, gave the world its first glimpse into the microscopic complexity of the brain. Through painstaking observations, Cajal mapped neurons, demonstrating that the brain was composed of individual cells. His work laid the foundation for modern neuroscience, offering a biological basis for thoughts and behaviors that had once been ascribed to mysterious forces. As the 20th century progressed, technology began to unveil the inner workings of the mind. Electroencephalograms, or EEGs, allowed scientists to observe the brain's electrical activity, revealing patterns associated with different mental states. Then came MRI imaging, a game-changer that let us see the brain in action, illuminating the regions involved in memory, language, and even decision-making. It was with MRI that we discovered something remarkable and unsettling. Scientists began to find that certain areas of the brain lit up in anticipation of decisions before subjects were consciously aware of them. In one study, participants were asked to press a button with their left or right hand. Using brain imaging, researchers found they could predict which hand a person would use several seconds before they themselves decided which hand to move. These findings hinted at something profound. The brain might be initiating actions before we're consciously aware of making a decision. The implications were shocking, challenging our very concept of free will. These early studies laid the groundwork for a fundamental shift in our understanding of the mind. If neurons were firing before we were aware of our own decisions, could we truly say we were in control? Researchers like Benjamin Libet dove deeper into this question, conducting experiments that measured brain activity before conscious awareness. Libet's work suggested that our sense of making a conscious decision might be an after-the-fact experience, a narrative we tell ourselves to create a feeling of agency and coherence. In these experiments, participants were asked to move their fingers whenever they wished and to note the exact moment they felt the urge to move. Libet found that brain activity leading up to the movement occurred nearly half a second before participants reported the urge to move. This sparked a debate that continues to this day. If the brain initiates an action before we're aware of it, is free will just an illusion? Gradually, the idea that we are the conscious architects of our decisions began to waver. Science was pulling back the curtain, revealing hidden mechanisms within our brains, patterns, impulses, and processes operating beneath the level of awareness. Today, neuroscience is only expanding on these early discoveries, exploring how subconscious forces shape everything from our emotions to our habits. We're starting to see that free will may be more about the interplay of complex neural networks and less about the independent I we think we are. As we stand on the edge of this new understanding, the question remains: if our thoughts and actions are shaped by forces we cannot fully control, then who or what are we? Are we merely passengers on a journey steered by unseen hands, or is there a way to reclaim control? Imagine you're driving home from work, winding through familiar streets, a route so well worn into your mind that it almost feels like muscle memory. You're replaying the day's conversations, maybe even planning the evening, and suddenly you're in your driveway. The strange part: you don't remember the drive at all. The turns, the lights, the moments where you waited behind other cars. You made it home safely, but it was as if someone else was behind the wheel. How often does this happen to you? This phenomenon of zoning out during repetitive tasks is something we've all experienced. Brushing our teeth, tying our shoes, walking a familiar path. There's a good chance that your brain, in those moments, is operating on autopilot, a state where routines are performed with such efficiency that conscious thought becomes unnecessary. But the twist is, could it be that much of what we consider conscious behavior is actually shaped by this hidden autopilot? When we dive into the mind, we begin to see that our self, the conscious being we think makes all the decisions, might only be witnessing the work of far deeper processes. Let's shift our gaze to the subconscious mind, the silent driver behind so much of our behavior. Consider, for instance, habits. Scientists estimate that 40 to 95% of what we do each day is driven not by conscious thought, but by ingrained patterns etched into the subconscious. This means that most of our day unfolds as a series of conditioned responses, influenced by our environment, emotions, and past experiences, rather than our immediate conscious intentions. Take, for example, the morning routine. Each morning, you might find yourself in a nearly identical pattern of movements. Reach for the toothbrush, squeeze the toothpaste, brush, rinse, spit. Your thoughts might be elsewhere entirely, planning the day ahead or mulling over a recent conversation. Yet your actions proceed without hesitation. How is this possible? Well, thanks to your subconscious mind. It specializes in speed, efficiency, and instinct. The subconscious is incredibly powerful, housing memories, emotions, and learned behaviors, all of which drive us in ways we rarely notice. Its role isn't just to handle simple routines, it also orchestrates how we react to situations, choose relationships, and even form our preferences. Scientists studying the brain's structure have discovered that decisions are often made in areas of the brain outside of conscious awareness. Take food cravings, for example. We don't consciously decide to crave chocolate. Rather, our subconscious registers cues, perhaps a visual cue from a chocolate commercial or a positive memory associated with chocolate, which leads to a craving long before we realize we want it. The subconscious is not merely a passenger on our journey, it's the one reading the map and controlling much of the steering, with the conscious mind often merely observing and making sense of what has already taken place. It's here, in this shadowed realm, that many of our decisions are born. Have you ever found yourself believing something just because it's been repeated enough times, or favoring information that aligns with what you already believe, dismissing anything that contradicts it? These tendencies are the product of cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that help our brains make decisions quickly, but often irrationally. These biases act like invisible puppeteers, pulling strings in our minds to guide our choices without us ever realizing it. Take confirmation bias, for example, the tendency to seek out information that supports our existing beliefs while ignoring what contradicts them. Imagine you're debating whether to try a new diet and you start researching it online. If you're already inclined to think it will work, you might ignore the scientific articles critiquing it and instead focus on success stories. This isn't because you're intentionally ignoring evidence, but because your subconscious is subtly guiding you to maintain the beliefs you already hold. The subconscious is driven not by logic, but by efficiency and emotional comfort, steering you toward what's familiar and reinforcing the status quo. Another powerful bias is the availability heuristic, where the mind latches onto information that is most readily accessible, often something we've seen recently or frequently. Say you've just heard a news story about a plane crash, and a friend invites you on a flight the following week. Despite knowing air travel is statistically safer than driving, your mind fixates on that recent story, amplifying your fear. The availability heuristic distorts our perception, tricking us into thinking that rare events are more common or probable than they actually are. These biases don't merely influence minor preferences, they shape our core beliefs, our judgments, and even the way we see other people. From choosing political candidates to making financial decisions, cognitive biases are subtle architects of the narratives we tell ourselves. They operate beneath our awareness, leaving us with the sensation that we're making conscious, rational decisions. But in truth, we're often following scripts written long before we became aware of the question. So, if the subconscious mind is steering so much of our behavior, then what role does our conscious mind play? A growing body of psychological research suggests that our conscious mind might act less like a decision maker and more like a storyteller, creating narratives to explain choices that have already been made. One of the most striking demonstrations of this is a series of studies on choice blindness. In one experiment, participants were shown two pictures of faces and asked to choose which person they found more attractive. But the twist is that once the choice was made, the researchers secretly swapped the photos, presenting participants with the image they had not selected. Astonishingly, many participants failed to notice the switch. What's even more surprising is that they proceeded to explain why they had chosen the face in front of them, offering detailed reasons for a choice they hadn't actually made. So what does this mean? It means that our conscious mind doesn't always drive our decisions. Rather, it creates coherent explanations for them after the fact. We tell ourselves, I chose this because, without realizing that the choice was influenced by factors entirely outside our awareness. This phenomenon, known as confabulation, highlights how our minds craft stories to make sense of our behavior, providing us with a comforting illusion of control. Another classic study where researchers set up a table of jams at a grocery store. They found that people were much more likely to purchase a jar of jam when presented with 6 options rather than 24. When asked why they made their choice, participants gave logical explanations. This one has a richer flavor, or I thought I'd try something new. But in reality, their choice had been subtly influenced by the number of options presented, a variable they didn't even consider in their reasoning. That is simply because when people are presented with too many options, they often feel overwhelmed and find it harder to make a decision. This illusion of control, this belief that we're consciously guiding our lives, is so ingrained that we rarely question it. We feel as though we're in the driver's seat, but in reality we're often watching the scenery, piecing together stories from fragments of subconscious influence, social conditioning, and random impulses. So, if so much of our behavior is dictated by subconscious mechanisms, cognitive biases, and post-factum storytelling, what does that mean for our sense of self? Are we truly in control? Or are we spectators of a life guided by hidden forces? And if our conscious minds are simply the narrators, then who or what is the author? Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, peering down at the dizzying drop below. Your palms sweat, your heart races, and an intense feeling rises in your chest, a blend of fear and thrill. This primal reaction is the work of your emotional brain, a powerful region nestled deep within your skull, known as the limbic system. Here, at the core of your being, lies a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, a vigilant guardian whose job it is to protect you, even if it means overriding reason. The amygdala is a bit like an ancient alarm system, one that has been honed over millions of years. When it senses danger or potential reward, it springs into action, flooding your body with a cocktail of chemicals that prepare you to fight, flee, or engage. The amygdala isn't concerned with complex logic or rational deliberation. Its purpose is survival. When you encounter something threatening, a snarling dog, a close call in traffic, or even a stressful email, your amygdala reacts instantly, triggering a cascade of physical and emotional responses long before your rational brain has had a chance to process what's happening. This is the heart of your emotional brain, constantly scanning for threats and rewards, making split-second decisions that shape your actions and reactions. The brain doesn't wait for you to think, reason, or consider all the options. In fact, it often prefers that you don't. Emotions, after all, evolved to keep us safe and responsive in a dangerous world. They are ancient forces that still drive much of what we do, often invisibly but always powerfully. Let's meet Dave, a hiker in his mid-30s, exploring a quiet, forested trail one autumn afternoon. As he rounds a bend, he freezes. A few yards away, a bear is foraging, unaware of Dave's presence. Every fibre of Dave's being screams at him to stand perfectly still. His breathing slows, his heart pounds, and his muscles tense in readiness for flight. His mind is a blur, caught in a primal battle between reason and instinct. Dave's rational mind might urge him to analyze his options, but his emotional brain, driven by the amygdala, has already seized control, bypassing conscious thought entirely. In this moment, survival isn't a logical choice, it's a command. The amygdala is operating in milliseconds, reacting based on millions of years of evolutionary conditioning that taught our ancestors to respect threats in the wild. Dave's response isn't based on reasoning or carefully weighing his options. It's rooted in instinct, driven by the brain's fundamental goal to protect him at all costs. Moments like these remind us of the brain's tendency to prioritize survival over rationality. It's why we may jump at a shadow, feel an inexplicable aversion to heights, or react defensively to a harsh tone of voice. These reactions are swift and often unconscious, rooted in a survival instinct that's embedded deep within us. The amygdala is both our friend and protector, but its influence over our actions goes well beyond moments of danger. It shapes how we feel, how we act, and ultimately how we make decisions. Think back to your favorite childhood memory. Perhaps you can almost feel the warmth of a summer day, hear the laughter of friends, or smell the sweetness of a treat. It's vivid, real, something you carry with you, but is it accurate? Neuroscience suggests that memories are not objective recordings, but living constructs, shaped by emotion and perception. Memory is deeply tied to the emotional brain, particularly the amygdala and its neighbor, the hippocampus. These regions work together to process and store memories with a twist. They prioritize emotional significance over accuracy. When we experience something with a strong emotional charge, a joyous celebration, a painful loss, or a terrifying close call, our brain marks it as important, etching it deeply into memory. But these memories are malleable. Each time we revisit them, we subtly alter them, often without realizing it. Take Julia, for example. She has a vivid memory of performing in her first school play, feeling a rush of pride as the audience applauded. But over the years, Julia's mind has embellished the event, amplifying the applause and even adding small details that may not have happened. Her brain reshaped the memory, painting it in hues of nostalgia and pride, reinforcing her identity as a confident performer. Memories like these aren't simple archives. They're stories shaped by the emotional brain, narratives we use to define who we are. This emotional editing doesn't just apply to the past, it influences the present. When we make decisions, we rely on memories for guidance, but those memories are tinged with the emotional context in which they were formed. They can push us towards certain choices, reinforce biases, and even hold us back from new experiences. We're often unaware of how our emotional brain shapes these memories, weaving stories that serve our need for coherence and meaning. Yet these stories aren't neutral, they're biased toward survival, comfort, and identity. As we explore deeper into the emotional brain, we encounter yet another layer of influence, the chemicals that fuel our feelings and shape our actions. Neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin play a crucial role in the brain's reward system, subtly guiding us toward behaviors that feel good, often overriding logical thought. Dopamine, sometimes called the feel-good neurotransmitter, is central to motivation and reward. When we anticipate pleasure, a favorite meal, a new purchase, a romantic date, dopamine surges, igniting a sense of excitement and anticipation. It's why we might stay up late watching just one more episode of a show or check our phones compulsively for notifications. The brain is wired to seek rewards, and dopamine serves as the fuel for that pursuit. Logical considerations often fade into the background, with dopamine urging us toward gratification. Serotonin, on the other hand, is associated with feelings of well-being and stability. It contributes to our mood regulation, helping us feel balanced and content. When serotonin levels dip, we may feel anxious or irritable, and our decision-making can become impulsive. This interplay between dopamine and serotonin creates a dynamic emotional landscape that shapes our actions. We might know rationally that a certain choice isn't wise, like staying up late before an important day. But if dopamine is flooding our brain, the allure of the reward often wins out over reason. Let's consider Tom, who's trying to eat healthily but finds himself craving a sugary snack every afternoon. He knows that eating a candy bar isn't the best choice, but as he contemplates it, dopamine starts to flow, rewarding him even before he takes a bite. The brain's pleasure center is activated, making the candy bar seem not only desirable but almost inevitable. In this moment, his logical mind is overpowered by a chemical signal designed to reward short-term pleasure, a leftover from our evolutionary past when quick energy meant survival. These neurotransmitters don't just influence our cravings, they shape everything from our social interactions to our risk-taking behaviors. The brain's chemistry creates a powerful, often invisible backdrop to our decisions, leading us towards experiences that promise pleasure and stability, sometimes at the expense of long-term goals or rational thinking. And while we like to believe we're acting based on reason, the truth is that the emotional brain, fueled by neurotransmitters, often has the final say. Our emotions, instincts, memories, and brain chemistry are powerful forces, often taking the wheel and guiding our lives in ways we don't fully realize. The rational mind likes to believe it's in control, but when it comes down to it, the emotional brain, the limbic system, the neurotransmitters, the subconscious memories, often steers the ship. Imagine you're sitting in a room with a group of strangers, each person answering a series of simple questions about line lengths. You've been instructed to say which line, A, B, or C, matches the length of a target line. The answer is obvious to you. But as each person ahead of you confidently gives the same clearly incorrect answer, doubt creeps in. When it's your turn, you hesitate. Do you give the right answer or go along with the group, even if it feels wrong? This was the dilemma faced by participants in Solomon Asch's famous 1950s conformity experiments, a study that forever altered our understanding of social influence. Asch's experiment was simple. Groups of people, most of whom were secretly in on the experiment, were asked to state which of three lines matched the length of a target line. In nearly every group, the majority purposely gave the wrong answer. The shocking result is that over a third of the real participants conformed to the incorrect majority at least once, even when they knew the answer was wrong. This experiment reveals something profound about human nature. We are social beings wired to belong. Conformity isn't just about agreeing to avoid conflict, it's a fundamental aspect of our social survival. Our ancestors' survival depended on cooperation within the group, and going against the group could mean exclusion, or worse, death. Over time, this pressure to conform became embedded in our minds, driving us to align our thoughts and actions with others, even at the expense of our own judgment. The need to belong, to fit in, is not a conscious choice. It's an automatic response, one that often overrides our logical reasoning. This same force of social influence still shapes us today, from the clothes we wear to the beliefs we hold. Even as individuals in a society that values independence, our decisions are not as free as they seem. We often think we're acting out of personal conviction when in reality we're conforming to the unspoken rules of the social groups around us. Take a moment to recall a time when you watched someone stumble and nearly fall, perhaps spilling their coffee in the process. Did you cringe a bit, feeling a flash of embarrassment or concern? That automatic reaction isn't a conscious decision. It's the work of mirror neurons, specialized cells in the brain that allow us to mirror the emotions, intentions, and actions of others. Mirror neurons form the biological basis for empathy, making us feel what others feel. Discovered in the 1990s by Italian researchers studying monkeys, mirror neurons fired not only when the monkeys performed an action, but also when they observed someone else doing the same. This discovery hinted at something remarkable. Our brains are wired to mirror the experiences of those around us. When we see someone smile, frown, or wince, our mirror neurons react as if we're experiencing the same thing. These cells are the reason we cringe when we see someone stub their toe, cheer when we see a friend succeed, or even tear up at a sad scene in a movie. Mirror neurons make empathy possible, but they also drive our tendency to conform. When we're in a group, these neurons prompt us to mimic others, aligning our emotions, expressions, and even thoughts with those around us. This is why laughter spreads through a crowd, why yawns are contagious, and why we often catch the emotions of those closest to us. By mirroring the social signals around us, mirror neurons foster group cohesion, enhancing our connections with others and ensuring that we can empathize with the people in our lives. This biological drive toward empathy and mirroring plays a significant role in our susceptibility to social influence. We're not just conforming out of fear of rejection. Our brains are wired to echo the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of others. In a sense, we're designed to lose ourselves in the social fabric, our individual desires and thoughts blending seamlessly with those of the group. In the digital age, social influence has found an amplifier like never before, and that is social media. Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now X, don't just connect us to friends and family, they also connect us to a continuous stream of content that shapes our beliefs, behaviors, and even emotions. But behind this constant flow of information lies something few of us fully understand. Algorithms designed to capture our attention and shape our experience of the world. Imagine scrolling through your social media feed. What you see isn't a random assortment of posts. It's a carefully curated selection based on your past behaviors, likes, and even the time you spend looking at each post. These algorithms are tailored to show you content that keeps you engaged, content that resonates with your existing beliefs and preferences. This selective exposure creates an echo chamber, reinforcing your views and subtly discouraging you from exploring opposing perspectives. Over time, this can create a distorted view of reality, one that aligns with your beliefs while filtering out conflicting information. Consider Emma, a college student who becomes interested in a particular social movement. She starts following relevant accounts, liking posts, and sharing content with friends. The algorithm notices her engagement and begins showing her even more posts about this movement, each one reinforcing her interest and commitment. Before long, her feed is filled with content from like-minded voices, amplifying her belief that this movement is not only widespread, but universally accepted. Emma isn't consciously seeking to isolate herself from opposing views, yet the algorithm has nudged her into a silo of reinforcing content. In this way, algorithms act as invisible architects of influence, shaping not just what we see, but how we think. We may feel as though we're engaging with diverse perspectives online, but in reality, we're often being funneled into echo chambers that amplify social influence. The consequences are profound. When our beliefs are continually reinforced, we're more likely to accept them as absolute truths, even if they're incomplete or biased. The power of digital influence lies in its subtlety. Unlike face-to-face social pressure, algorithms operate quietly, embedding influence within the fabric of our online experience. We're drawn toward what aligns with our beliefs and emotions, often without realizing that the algorithm is guiding our journey. And as we scroll, click and share, our perceptions are molded by these digital currents, shaping our thoughts and beliefs in ways that are difficult to reverse. From ancient group survival to modern-day social media, our brains are designed to be influenced by others. We may believe we're independent thinkers, but our thoughts, beliefs, and even our sense of self are shaped by the social currents around us. Conformity, empathy, and digital algorithms combine to create a powerful, often invisible force, one that directs our lives as we strive to belong and connect. You're at a lively party, surrounded by people chatting, glasses clinking, and music playing softly in the background. Despite all the noise, you hear someone mention your name from across the room, clear as a bell. You turn, scanning the crowd, trying to find the source. This is an example of selective attention, your brain's ability to tune out most of the sensory chaos and focus on what feels important. But while you were listening for your name, what else did you miss? Selective attention is a powerful yet limited function of the human brain, and it creates an illusion. We believe we're fully aware of our surroundings, but in reality we only perceive a tiny fraction of what's going on. Psychologists have demonstrated this through famous experiments, such as the invisible gorilla test. In this study, participants are asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and instructed to count the number of passes. Midway through the video, a person in a gorilla suit walks into the scene, pauses, and then exits. Shockingly, nearly half the participants fail to notice the gorilla because their attention is so focused on counting passes. This phenomenon, known as inattentional blindness, highlights how easy it is for our minds to miss significant details when we're focused elsewhere. Our minds are wired for efficiency, filtering out unnecessary information to conserve mental energy. This works well in day-to-day life, but it also means that our perception is narrower than we realize. For instance, while driving, you might focus on the road, your speed, and the car ahead of you, yet completely miss the billboard advertising a new product. Or, while reading a book in a noisy coffee shop, your brain filters out the ambient noise, allowing you to stay absorbed in the text. This limited scope of attention means that much of what happens around us slips past unnoticed, creating gaps that can be exploited by those who understand the mind's selective nature. Imagine you're walking down a brightly lit grocery aisle and a display of cereal boxes catches your eye. Each box is carefully designed, the colors bold and inviting, with friendly cartoon characters staring up at you, smiling. If you look closely, you might notice that these characters' eyes are often tilted downward, strategically designed to make eye contact with young children. This subtle detail isn't accidental. It's part of a calculated strategy to capture attention and ultimately influence decision-making. Advertisers have spent decades studying human psychology to understand how colors, sounds, and emotional triggers impact our choices. Advertisers are adept at using visual cues to bypass rational thought, tapping directly into our emotions. These tactics are so effective that they influence our choices even when we're not consciously aware of them. Consider a TV commercial that features a soft, nostalgic song as a young family gathers around a holiday meal. The warm lighting, the heartfelt smiles, the homey setting, All of these elements are meticulously crafted to evoke a specific emotional response. You might find yourself yearning for that sense of connection, that warmth, even if you know the advertisement is designed to sell you a product. In that moment, you're not responding to the product itself, but to the emotions it conjures. Studies show that emotional appeals are far more effective in driving consumer behavior than logical arguments. The reason is simple. Emotions bypass our rational brain, nudging us to act without engaging our critical thinking skills. Advertising has become so sophisticated that it can influence us even when we believe we're immune to its tricks. We think we're making decisions based on personal choice, but in reality our attention has been carefully guided, our emotions subtly manipulated. This ability to direct our focus and evoke specific feelings gives media and advertising an extraordinary degree of influence over our behavior, often without us even realizing it. Imagine opening your favorite social media app, expecting to check a few notifications. Within minutes, you find yourself scrolling, mindlessly moving from one post to the next, 30 minutes gone before you even realize it. This isn't an accident. Apps are deliberately designed to hold your attention, drawing on psychological principles that make them addictive by design. One of the most effective tools in the tech industry's arsenal is variable reward scheduling, a tactic borrowed from slot machines. When you open an app, you don't know exactly what you'll see. Maybe an exciting post, a new message, or a friend's latest update. This uncertainty creates a rush of dopamine, a neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and reward. Each time you scroll or refresh, you anticipate a reward, and even if you don't get it immediately, the possibility keeps you hooked. It's the same principle that makes gambling so addictive. The brain craves the next potential hit, driving you to engage repeatedly. Another technique is infinite scrolling, where new content appears as you reach the bottom of the page, removing the natural stopping points that might otherwise signal a break. Platforms like Instagram and Twitter have honed this feature to perfection, making it easy to lose track of time as you scroll through a never-ending stream of updates. This continuous feed keeps users engaged longer than they intend, subtly capturing attention and making it difficult to disengage. Notifications are another potent tool. Each ping, buzz, or alert is a carefully calculated attempt to pull you back into the app. These notifications are designed to play on the human tendency to seek social validation. When a friend likes your post, comments on your photo, or tags you in an update, it creates a feedback loop that reinforces our need for connection. The dopamine hit that accompanies this interaction is short-lived, making us crave the next one, like a series of small doses that keep us coming back for more. These addictive design features reveal the true value of attention in the digital age. Tech companies make their revenue primarily through advertising, and to maximize profits, they need you to stay engaged. The longer you're on their platform, the more data they collect about your preferences and behaviors, which they can use to target you with even more specific content and ads. Your attention, once seen as an intangible asset, has become a commodity, a resource that companies are competing to capture and control. In this attention economy, we're the product. Our time and focus are sold to the highest bidder. The apps and platforms we use daily are designed to keep us coming back, subtly shaping our habits, our thoughts, and even our beliefs. And while we may believe we're in control, the reality is that much of our attention is steered by forces outside our awareness, cleverly crafted to keep us engaged no matter the cost. Our minds, with their limited capacity for attention, are fertile ground for those who understand how to capture focus and steer behavior. Whether it's the media playing on our emotions, advertisers shaping our desires, or tech giants keeping us glued to our screens, the world around us is filled with forces vying for control over what we see, feel, and believe. Waking up in the morning, shuffling to the kitchen and brewing a cup of coffee. You may barely remember the steps. The act feels automatic, ingrained. These daily rituals, repeated in precise order, illustrate a powerful phenomenon in human behavior, the habit loop. At the center of this process is a part of the brain known as the basal ganglia, a small but mighty region responsible for coordinating routine, repeated behaviors. The habit loop operates in three parts: cue, routine, and reward. A cue is a trigger, waking up, feeling stressed, seeing the coffee machine, that signals the brain to initiate a certain behavior. The routine is the behavior itself, performed with minimal conscious involvement. Finally, the reward, perhaps the smell of coffee or the jolt of caffeine, reinforces the habit loop, encouraging repetition. Over time, these steps become so entrenched that they bypass our conscious thought altogether, handled swiftly by the basal ganglia. While the cortex, our brain's rational processing center, is more involved in complex decision-making, the basal ganglia takes over when behaviors become habitual, freeing the conscious mind for other tasks. This is why you can drive home, brush your teeth, or even eat without consciously planning each step. The brain craves efficiency, and the basal ganglia acts like an autopilot, ensuring that we execute familiar routines with minimal effort. This makes habits incredibly resilient. They're stored in a deep part of the brain, structurally separated from conscious thought, which is why they're so challenging to change. The strength of habit loops demonstrates the brain's preference for stability and routine. While this makes habits beneficial for efficiency, it also means that behaviors once ingrained can become almost immovable, dictating our actions with little involvement from our conscious mind. Understanding this process reveals why breaking or forming habits requires more than willpower. It requires rewiring the brain's structure. Why is it so hard to break a habit? Even when we're aware of a habit that isn't serving us, like biting nails, procrastinating, or snacking mindlessly, stopping feels nearly impossible. This difficulty is due to the brain's wiring, which is hard-coded to favor stability and resist change, even if the current routine isn't optimal. The basal ganglia, having stored the habit loop, resists alterations, making change feel like a physical uphill battle. Take smoking, for example. For many smokers, lighting a cigarette after a meal or during a stressful moment has become a deeply ingrained routine, accompanied by a powerful reward in the form of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure. The reward reinforces the loop, encouraging the smoker to repeat the action under similar circumstances. Even if the person wants to quit, the brain resists, often interpreting the absence of the habit as a loss, leading to discomfort, anxiety, and a strong urge to revert to the old behavior. Breaking a habit, then, involves more than simply avoiding certain cues. It requires consciously disrupting the loop by either replacing the routine with a new behavior or altering the reward system. However, this rewiring is easier said than done. Studies show that replacing habits takes time, effort, and consistency, qualities that the brain, accustomed to the ease of routine, doesn't favor. To form a new habit, one must consistently perform the new behavior in response to the old cue, which eventually allows the basal ganglia to replace the old loop with the new one. This is why change is so challenging. Our brains fight to maintain established routines. It's the same reason why starting a workout regimen or developing a new work habit can feel exhausting. The brain's preference for stability makes habit breaking a process that requires not only patience, but a deep commitment to repatterning the pathways that define our behaviors. Picture a young child absorbing the world like a sponge, watching their parents, siblings and teachers closely, internalizing everything from language to emotional responses. Childhood is a critical period for conditioning, where foundational beliefs, reactions and habits are shaped and solidified. During these years, behaviors learned through observation, reinforcement and repetition embed deeply into the subconscious, forming the roots of our adult personalities. Consider a child growing up in an environment where stress is managed through comfort eating. Each time the child is given a treat to soothe their distress, a pattern forms. Stress becomes the cue, eating becomes the routine, and the sense of relief is the reward. Over time, this habit becomes automatic, reinforced by the basal ganglia, embedding itself as a response to stress. By adulthood, this conditioned response to stress might feel like an intrinsic part of the individual's personality, even if it stems from learned behavior. This is the power of subconscious conditioning. It establishes mental shortcuts that dictate behavior, often without our conscious awareness. In childhood, the brain is especially receptive to conditioning. Neural plasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt, is at its peak, allowing habits and patterns to form quickly. Once these pathways are set, they become mental default settings, influencing actions, relationships, and even self-identity. The child who grows up learning to avoid conflict might carry that same habit into adulthood, becoming a chronic people pleaser. The adult may not realize that this behavior is a conditioned response, not an inherent personality trait. These early habit loops shape our personalities, influencing our choices, reactions, and interpersonal dynamics. Changing them often requires confronting and reprogramming patterns deeply embedded in the subconscious, a task that demands introspection, effort, and time. By understanding the roots of these habits, we can begin to see how much of who we believe ourselves to be is simply the result of conditioning, embedded early on and strengthened over years of repetition. Habits and conditioning shape the fabric of our daily lives, operating beneath conscious awareness to influence our thoughts, actions, and even our identities. They are powerful because they're automated, bypassing the need for constant decision-making. But in this automation lies both freedom and constraint. The freedom of efficiency and the constraint of being bound to patterns that may no longer serve us. Imagine sitting in a lab with electrodes attached to your scalp, asked to perform a simple task. You're told to press a button whenever you feel like it, and you'll report the exact moment you felt the urge to press it. This was the setup of Benjamin Libbet's groundbreaking 1983 experiment, which forever changed the way we understand free will and consciousness. Libbet's experiment was deceptively simple, but produced extraordinary findings. While participants believed they were deciding to press the button consciously, Libbet and his team discovered something surprising. The brain activity initiating the action, known as the readiness potential, occurred approximately 200 milliseconds before participants reported feeling the conscious intention to act. In other words, their brains decided before they were consciously aware of their decision. 𝐿IBET's findings were controversial, sparking debates among scientists, philosophers, and psychologists. Did this mean that free will was an illusion, a comforting story we tell ourselves to feel in control? According to 𝐿IBET, our conscious selves play a role, but only in a limited way. He suggested that while our brains might initiate actions subconsciously, our conscious awareness has a brief window, a veto power, to stop or allow the action to proceed. This compromise, known as the free won't theory, suggested that while we might not consciously generate our impulses, we can exercise control over whether to act on them. However, 𝐿IBET's experiment opened up far more questions than it answered. If the brain is making decisions before we are aware of them, who or what is truly in charge? Is the conscious mind merely a bystander, watching the decisions made by neural mechanisms operating outside its awareness? This question set the stage for a series of studies that continue to explore the nature of free will and conscious awareness, revealing new layers of complexity in how we understand ourselves. The idea that our conscious selves might be observers rather than authors of our actions is a concept that challenges our deepest beliefs about identity and control. If we're not actively making our choices but rather observing them after the fact, then what is the self that we so closely identify with? The idea of the observer self suggests that the conscious mind is like a narrator in a story, experiencing events and creating explanations for actions already initiated by unconscious processes. This observer self is the aspect of consciousness that notices, evaluates, and remembers, allowing us to reflect on past actions and anticipate future ones. Yet it may have less control over the present moment than we'd like to think. Consider how you might make a decision as simple as ordering coffee. You tell yourself that you choose the drink, weighing options and considering preferences. But recent research suggests that this process might be an illusion. Your brain has likely already made the decision, guided by factors like memory, past experiences, and subconscious preferences long before you consciously think about your choice. The conscious mind, the I that believes it is choosing, may simply be observing the unfolding of a decision already made. In a sense, the observer self provides the illusion of free will, stitching together moments into a coherent narrative of me making choices. This narrative is comforting because it gives us a sense of agency and continuity. But if the observer self is simply witnessing rather than controlling, then our lives may be driven by an intricate network of subconscious forces, from ingrained habits to emotional responses, all operating outside of conscious control. This concept is unsettling, but also liberating. It suggests that while we may not control every action, we have the capacity to observe, reflect, and understand our minds. And with this understanding, we can engage with our behavior in new ways, perhaps finding a deeper, more intentional form of self-awareness. Since 𝐿IBET's pioneering work, advances in neuroscience, particularly with functional magnetic resonance imaging or fMRI, have deepened our understanding of the brain's role in decision-making. Today, scientists can observe patterns of neural activity milliseconds before a person becomes aware of their choices, uncovering details that reinforce and expand upon 𝐿IBET's findings. In 2008, neuroscientists led by John Dylan Haynes at the Max Planck Institute conducted a landmark fMRI study that explored the timing of decision-making processes, Participants were asked to press one of two buttons whenever they chose, with the only requirement being to note the exact moment they decided which button to press. By analysing brain activity patterns, researchers could predict participants' choices as much as 7 seconds before they consciously made them. This finding suggested that our subconscious brain might determine decisions well in advance of our conscious awareness. These results challenge traditional notions of free will, pointing to a model where decisions are shaped by networks of neurons outside our awareness. The brain scans showed that specific regions, such as the prefrontal cortex and parietal cortex, are activated in anticipation of choices, suggesting that unconscious mechanisms weigh options, calculate outcomes, and arrive at a decision, all before we're aware of making it. The conscious mind, then, may be more of a spectator, watching the show unfold rather than directing the action. These discoveries lead us into the heart of modern neuroscience, where questions about consciousness and agency become increasingly complex. For example, some researchers argue that free will exists, but in a more distributed form, an interplay between conscious thoughts, subconscious impulses, and environmental factors. Others suggest that the concept of free will might need to be redefined or even abandoned, as our decisions appear to be influenced by biological and psychological factors beyond our control. Despite the evidence, the idea that we lack free will remains difficult to accept. The feeling of agency, the sense that I am making choices, is deeply ingrained. This gap between perception and reality reflects the power of the observer self, the part of us that weaves together our experiences into a seamless narrative of control and purpose. And yet, neuroscience continues to uncover patterns of subconscious influence, reshaping our understanding of human nature and consciousness. As neuroscience reveals the intricacies of the mind, the question of who we are becomes more complex. If decisions arise from subconscious processes, if the conscious self is merely observing choices already made, then our concept of self and control may be an illusion, one crafted by the brain itself. This realization invites us to question not only free will, but the very nature of identity. In a world where the brain acts before we're aware, what role does consciousness play? And if our thoughts and actions stem from networks of subconscious influences, then perhaps true freedom lies not in controlling every choice, but in understanding the forces that shape us. Imagine standing in a courtroom where a defendant is accused of a crime, yet neuroscientific evidence reveals that the defendant's brain activity may have predisposed them to act in a certain way. Could we then hold them fully accountable? As our understanding of the brain and subconscious decision-making grows, questions of accountability and moral responsibility within the justice system are becoming more complex. The justice system operates under the assumption that individuals have free will, meaning they're capable of making conscious choices and therefore bear responsibility for their actions. However, as studies like 𝐂𝐨𝐷𝐻's and 𝐂𝐻𝐬's reveal, much of our behavior may stem from unconscious neural processes beyond conscious control. Consider cases involving impulse control disorders, addiction, or even aggressive behavior, where individuals act on urges they may struggle to understand, let alone control. If a person's behavior is partially driven by subconscious patterns or neurobiological factors, should they be held entirely responsible for actions they may not have fully controlled? Some legal scholars and neuroscientists argue for a re-evaluation of legal accountability in light of neuroscience, suggesting that punishment should focus more on rehabilitation and less on retribution. They propose neurocompatibilism, where legal accountability considers an individual's conscious awareness but also weighs underlying brain mechanisms. In practical terms, this could mean adjusting sentences for individuals whose neural conditions limit their self-control, focusing instead on treatments that might help them regain some level of autonomy. But these ideas also raise ethical concerns. If we reduce accountability for people who act impulsively, where do we draw the line? Could this lead to a system where people claim diminished responsibility based on brain scans alone? The risk lies in absolving individuals of responsibility, which could destabilize trust in the legal system. These questions highlight a difficult balance. We must find a way to acknowledge the influence of subconscious processes while ensuring that personal responsibility and justice remain intact. The implications of mind control and subconscious influence extend well beyond the courtroom, touching on how individuals approach self-improvement, addiction, and mental health. If we understand that much of our behavior is influenced by unconscious mechanisms, then traditional models of self-discipline and mind over matter may be less effective than we think. Take addiction, for instance. For years, addiction has been framed as a lack of willpower or a failure to make responsible choices. However, recent research shows that addiction rewires neural pathways, creating deeply embedded habit loops that make resisting cravings incredibly difficult. Knowing that addiction is driven by brain chemistry and subconscious reinforcement, individuals and therapists are shifting toward treatments that work with the brain rather than against it. Approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and mindfulness-based relapse prevention focus on identifying and altering subconscious triggers rather than relying solely on willpower to overcome cravings. In the realm of personal development, understanding the mind's automatic processes opens up new possibilities for self-improvement. For example, rather than trying to force positive habits, individuals can use the brain's tendency toward repetition to their advantage by introducing small, consistent changes that gradually reshape their habit loops. Techniques like implementation intentions, where people create specific plans for responding to triggers, like if I feel stressed, I'll go for a walk instead of reaching for a snack, work with the brain's existing structure to make change easier and more sustainable. This approach also changes the way we view mental health. Traditional self-help models often encourage positive thinking and reframing negative beliefs. However, if subconscious influences drive our self-image and beliefs, then true change may require deeper, more consistent practice like mindfulness or cognitive restructuring. This shift moves self-improvement from the conscious realm of positive thinking into a structured, science-based approach that recognizes the subconscious forces at play. If much of our behavior is shaped by subconscious processes, can we still regain a sense of control? Many believe that awareness is the key to bridging the gap between our conscious intentions and unconscious influences, with practices like mindfulness meditation offering promising methods for cultivating that awareness. Mindfulness is the practice of paying deliberate, non-judgmental attention to one's thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. When practiced consistently, mindfulness increases awareness of automatic thoughts and reactions, allowing individuals to observe rather than react impulsively. Neuroscientific research shows that mindfulness can reshape neural pathways by activating the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for self-regulation, and reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional center. This shift fosters a state of meta-awareness, where we can observe our thoughts without being controlled by them, a critical skill for anyone seeking greater self-control. Take anxiety, for example. Anxiety often manifests as a series of automatic, fear-driven thoughts that spiral out of control. When individuals practice mindfulness, they learn to observe these thoughts without immediately reacting to them, reducing their influence over time. This practice can help break the automatic link between anxious thoughts and anxious feelings, empowering individuals to respond with intention rather than fear. For individuals looking to break free from unconscious patterns, mindfulness-based approaches such as meditation, deep breathing exercises, and mindful movement provide tools for rewiring the brain's responses. By practicing mindfulness consistently, individuals can cultivate a heightened awareness of their thought patterns, gradually reducing the influence of ingrained habits and reactions. This doesn't eliminate subconscious influences, but helps individuals gain enough awareness to choose different responses in the face of automatic urges. Mindfulness also plays a role in reducing cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias or negativity bias, which often shape our reactions and decisions without our knowledge. When people become more aware of their tendencies to seek confirmatory information or to dwell on negative events, they can consciously counteract these biases by seeking diverse perspectives and focusing on balanced, realistic views. In this way, awareness becomes a powerful tool, allowing us to counteract automatic patterns that may otherwise drive our thoughts and actions. As we uncover the layers of subconscious influence on behavior, the question of control grows more nuanced. Our understanding of mind control, once confined to myths and sci-fi stories, is now a scientific reality, revealing that much of our behavior may not be as freely chosen as we once believed. Yet, the potential for awareness offers a path forward. While we may not have absolute control, we do have the capacity for awareness, for observing our own minds and gradually reshaping our responses. The power of awareness, cultivated through practices like mindfulness, enables us to live with intention, navigating the world of subconscious influence with a sense of purpose and autonomy. This journey into self-awareness challenges us to redefine control and to understand freedom not as absolute choice, but as the ability to engage with our thoughts and actions consciously, creating a life that reflects our true values. The question of free will, whether we truly have control over our actions, has fascinated philosophers for centuries, revealing a spectrum of beliefs that range from staunch support of free will to strict determinism. Aristotle was one of the first to explore the concept of choice, arguing that humans have a unique capacity for reason and thus for moral responsibility. In his view, our ability to choose between right and wrong formed the foundation for a just society, with each individual accountable for their actions. Fast forward to the 19th century and we encounter Arthur Schopenhauer, who took a radically different stance. Schopenhauer argued that what we consider will is just an illusion, with our desires and motivations shaped by subconscious forces beyond our control. Man can do what he wills, he famously stated, but he cannot will what he wills. In other words, it means that while a person can choose to act on their desires and make decisions, he does not have control over those desires themselves. Schopenhauer's perspective challenges the idea that we are masters of our own choices, proposing instead that our behavior is governed by innate drives, instincts, and emotions. In recent years, Sam Harris, a contemporary philosopher and neuroscientist, has championed a determinist view heavily influenced by neuroscience. In his book, Harris argues that free will is not only an illusion, but a comforting one. He describes consciousness as a passenger on a journey guided by biological processes that determine our choices before we're even aware of them. For Harris, our actions are shaped by brain activity, genetics and environment, leading to the conclusion that free will is an illusion, a narrative the brain constructs to make sense of our behavior. Each of these perspectives, Aristotle's belief in moral choice, Schopenhauer's deterministic drives, and Harris's neuroscience-based determinism, reflects a different era's understanding of the human mind. This spectrum of views forms the backbone of the free will debate, revealing a tension between our desire for agency and the constraints of our biology and psychology. Today, neuroscience is entering the conversation with evidence that challenges traditional concepts of free will. Studies by scientists like Benjamin Libet and John Dylan Haynes have shown that brain activity related to decision-making begins milliseconds before we're consciously aware of making a choice. These findings suggest that our brains initiate actions before our conscious minds take credit for them, raising questions about whether free will exists at all in the way we perceive it. Neuroscience reveals that the mind is a complex network of neurons firing in response to stimuli, past experiences, and genetic factors. But does this mean that all of our actions are predetermined? Some philosophers argue for compatibilism, the idea that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. Philosopher Daniel Dennett, for example, believes that even if our choices are shaped by biological and environmental factors, the ability to reflect, reason, and choose among different options still provides a form of practical freedom. In other words, while our choices may be influenced by subconscious processes, the conscious mind has a role in interpreting, evaluating, and even overriding certain impulses, giving us a sense of autonomy. On the other end, hard determinists argue that neuroscience supports a fully deterministic view, where every thought, feeling, and action is a product of prior causes, leaving no room for true agency. This view suggests that, while we feel as though we're making choices, our thoughts and actions unfold according to an intricate network of causes beyond our control. From this perspective, free will is not just limited, but fundamentally non-existent, a comforting fiction that helps us navigate life's complexities. Thus, the dialogue between philosophy and neuroscience is illuminating both the limitations and possibilities of human agency. Whether we side with compatibilism or hard determinism, it's clear that our understanding of free will must now account for the influences of biology, psychology, and environment, all of which play a role in shaping who we are and how we act. For many, the notion that free will may be an illusion is unsettling. After all, if our actions are not truly our own, where does that leave us? Does life still hold meaning if we're merely following a pre-written script? This existential question has led people to reconcile the paradox of control and meaning in various ways. One approach is to embrace the idea of soft determinism, accepting that while we may not have full control over our choices, we can find purpose in how we respond to life's circumstances. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, argued that even if we cannot control all aspects of life, we can choose how we respond to them, finding meaning in resilience, compassion, and creativity. In this way, purpose becomes a process of self-discovery, one that allows us to shape our identities and values despite external influences. For others, mindfulness offers a pathway to engage consciously with life, cultivating awareness of subconscious processes and patterns. Practices like meditation and self-reflection help bridge the gap between our conscious and subconscious selves, allowing us to make intentional choices even when external forces exert influence. By fostering self-awareness, individuals can take ownership of their lives in a way that aligns with their values, even if absolute control remains elusive. Ultimately, the reconciliation between determinism and meaning lies in embracing the paradox itself, accepting that while we may be influenced by forces beyond our awareness, we still experience life as agents capable of love, growth, and transformation. This approach allows for a fulfilling life grounded in values, relationships, and purpose, whether or not free will exists in its purest form. In the end, the debate between free will and determinism continues to evolve, enriched by insights from philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. While the existence of free will remains unresolved, the journey to understand it deepens our appreciation of the complexities of human experience, revealing that, in the search for meaning, the questions themselves may be as valuable as the answers. As we conclude this journey into the mind, one powerful idea stands out: awareness is key. Understanding the brain's control mechanisms, its reliance on habits, its susceptibility to social influence, its tendency toward automatic responses, doesn't strip us of free will. Instead, it offers a path to reclaiming a deeper, more conscious freedom. Awareness empowers us to observe the subtle forces shaping our thoughts, decisions, and behaviors, allowing us to intervene and choose with greater intention. Neuroscience has shown us how habits form, how cognitive biases operate, and how our brains often make choices before we're aware of them. This knowledge could be disheartening, leading us to believe we're little more than passengers on a preset journey. But if we see awareness as a form of agency, a means of navigating the mind's inner workings, then each insight becomes an opportunity for transformation. When we can see the triggers of our habits, recognize our emotional patterns, or identify our subconscious beliefs, we gain a moment of choice, a chance to act with clarity and purpose rather than compulsion. For instance, if you understand that stress is a cue that triggers a habit loop, like emotional eating or procrastination, you can intentionally redirect your response. You can practice mindfulness, substitute healthier routines, and over time, rewire that habit loop. Awareness, then, is the bridge between unconscious impulses and conscious choices, giving us the tools to shape the paths our lives take. In embracing this understanding, we also arrive at a new way of viewing the self. Rather than seeing ourselves as singular autonomous beings with complete control, we can begin to see ourselves as dynamic interactions of diverse influences: biological, psychological, social, and environmental. This perspective is humbling but also incredibly empowering. By acknowledging these influences, we accept that we are a blend of nature and nurture, choice and conditioning, conscious and subconscious. Recognizing this complexity offers us freedom in a way traditional ideas of free will cannot. Instead of trying to exert absolute control, we learn to cultivate a form of inner harmony, one that balances the mind's many voices and perspectives. This shift doesn't negate the self but deepens it, allowing us to engage with our full range of thoughts, emotions, and experiences more consciously. When we understand the roles of the amygdala in emotional responses, the basal ganglia in habit formation, or mirror neurons in social influence, we can start to direct our growth from a place of insight, compassion, and intention. This perspective allows us to own our experiences, both internal and external, as part of a complex self that is ever evolving. It encourages us to approach self-improvement with curiosity and patience, recognizing that true growth involves both the discipline to change and the humility to accept the influences that shape us. As we step away from this exploration, one sentiment resonates. We are neither powerless passengers nor omnipotent controllers. We are active participants in an unfolding process. The balance between humility and empowerment lies in understanding that while we may not control every influence, we can shape our responses to them. A quote by Viktor Frankl encapsulates this beautifully. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. With each insight into the brain's workings, we discover a piece of that space, a moment in which we can decide, reflect, and shape our lives with awareness. And in doing so, we take back the power not to control every force, but to live more intentionally, fully, and freely.